Okay, alrighty. Let's, I guess, is it time? It's time. Let's start. Okay. Apologies again for having to do a online lecture on Friday. I just really wasn't feeling good. And so I figured this was better than me coming in and coughing the whole time. Oh, there we go. So, let us jump into some qualitative interviewing. We'll talk about some things. And I went back a couple slides from where the video ended for Friday just to talk about semi-structured again. So, semi-structured interviewing, right? So, this is by far your most common type of interview. And basically because it's the one where you have, a little bit of prep, right? So you've got a list of questions and topics that you want to cover when you're doing a semi-structured interview, and you've done a little bit of preparation beforehand. So I mean, compared to an unstructured interview, you're going to have a somewhat longer interview guide. And depending on how long you're going to be going with people, probably somewhere in the range, I would guess, of 20 to 25 questions on average, right? Like if you're going to do a 1 hour, hour and a half interview, 20, 25 questions might be a little long. If you have a little longer, 2 hours, that'll easily fit within that kind of time frame. Now, when you're doing this, obviously the whole thing with interviewing is people are free to answer in any way they choose, right? So what'll end up happening is you'll have your list of questions. Someone will go off in one direction. You're going to probe and ask some follow-up questions, and then probably go back to your interview guide. Maybe when one, like you're going down the rabbit hole and you hit the end of one kind of string, you go back then to the interview guide for some more prompts. So often, this will be, you ask questions out of order, right? You have your 1 to 20, your order should be really pretty loose because you're going to end up jumping around in your interview guide. And I remember having my list of 15 or 20 questions in interviews, and just naturally some of the topics that I wanted to cover were covered in kind of the free flow of conversation. So it's you hit kind of the end of a rabbit or of a discussion, and you look through your list and you're like, okay, actually I think I covered this. Okay, then you jump maybe to another question further down the list, or back up to something that wasn't covered. And it's just kind of like, it's a conversation. The interview guide is there essentially to help you so you don't have to brainstorm everything on the fly, so that you cover all of your really important topics. And yeah, you're always going to be coming up with new questions on the spot, right? Because someone's going to say something interesting to you that you didn't think about, and you're going to follow up with that, on that. Ask them, hey, tell me more about that. Oh, could you define this? Actually, why did that person do that, right? So it's a very organic kind of process. But you have a very specific focus on your topic of interest. So you want to make sure that you keep things, to the interview guide is to kind of keep you on topic, right? At the end of the day, you want to be on topic. Okay. And, uh-oh, that's never good. My phone just buzzed. I think I know who it is. Really useful if you have more than one person going out in the field and you want to make sure that at least some basic topics get covered. Okay. So one of the reasons I went back is because this is from this is a chart from the textbook. I didn't make this up. These are questions that the textbook sort of suggests. And it's kind of funny because when I look at these, I always think some of these are really bad questions. And I'll tell you why. So one of the things you never ever want to do in semi-structured interviewing is ask questions that could be answered yes or no. Why? Because having yes or no questions, especially a very quick sequence of them, is one of the best ways to bring a conversation with someone to a screeching halt. Because help, the building is collapsing. I think that's like up on the 3rd floor, and it just rattles through the concrete down 2 floors. So we've been hearing this for months in the CCR. Okay. Yeah, yes or no questions are a really good way for the conversation to get nowhere, right? If you have a bunch of yes or no questions, you are going to find that people don't react that well and you don't get rolling on anything. So, like, this is a bad question. Why? Did you enjoy the art program? Yes. Oh, or no. And then you've got to think up a follow-up, right? So I would say, like, you generally want a question like this to be a little, to be phrased in such a way that it would force the person to put some thought in and give you sort of something that you could then kind of dig into, right? So rather than, did you enjoy the art program, you could just add what to this sentence? What did you enjoy about the art program? And that's so then they will tell you, oh, I really enjoyed making a voodoo doll of my professor that I could then stab pins into because that jerk gave me such bad grades, right? And you could be like, oh, tell me some more about that, right? What kind of materials were used? Are you going to do that to me if you don't like how this interview turns out, right? Those sorts of things, right? But just stay away from questions that could be answered yes or no. You could also be like, did you enjoy the art program? Why or why not, right? But I feel like that's a very awkward phrasing that you would more likely see like on a midterm, very bad professor phrasing. But you really, really don't want to give, honestly, just go out with someone for coffee and just ask them a series of yes or no questions, and you'll see how awkward that feels in about 30 seconds, right? So, do you have many friends / get along with others your age? Yes. Right? How about this? Tell me about your friends, right? Who are your friends and what do you guys do when you're together, right? Rather than, and if that person has no friends, they will tell you, oh, I actually really don't have any friends. And then the interview has entered an awkward phase. But, you've got your information. Rather than like, do you have many friends / get along with others your age? Do you get along with others your age? Yes or no? No. I like older people. Okay, this is not going to be a very helpful question, right? Have you been getting along with your parents? Yes. No. It doesn't tell you anything. So again, rephrasing this into, tell me about your relationship with your parents, right? Without hopefully getting them on like a weird Freudian thing. But, you want to make it so that they tell you something, right? That they open up, that they give you some information about these particular things. And probing questions, what activities did you like? I would say that in some ways you should build at least some of these into your initial question. But probing questions are all about getting more information about something that they found that they liked or something they told you, right? So if they tell you about the art, oh yeah, I really liked voodoo doll making. It's like, oh, did you like the instructor for the voodoo doll making session? Yes, they were very creepy. I don't know. Do you sometimes get into arguments with other people your age, right? Hopefully they've told you something here. I actually get into a lot of fights with people my age. Oh, tell me about those fights. Like, what do you guys fight about? Probe questions have to in some way be related to typically something that people told you. Anyway, this is from the textbook, making me suspect that whoever wrote the textbook chapter had never spoken to a human being, had never conducted. Sometimes I wonder with academics who write textbooks, is like, have you ever met a student? Just curious. Do you know many? Because some of the things that you do in your textbook are anti-student in the extreme. Also, have you ever talked to a human being? Or recently talked to a human being? I sometimes wonder, especially this textbook has some weird stuff. So yeah, these are not great examples, and now that I've dissected them and had fun making fun of the textbook authors, who I'm sure are much richer than me for having sold, thousands of copies of this textbook just on my back alone, nevertheless, they did not do a good job on those questions. Okay, so preparing an interview guide, and sometimes people refer to this also as an interview schedule. And I'll tell you why this is funny. Because I think I may still be on the assignment. I think I reworded it, but if I didn't, I had put this in. I think it was the first time I taught the class, and I was like, provide a sample interview schedule on your major lab. And someone was like, Monday, I will do 3. And I'm like, oh, no, that's not what this means. It's just a schedule of questions, right? Or an interview schedule. It means the same thing as interview guide. I'm not asking you to, and it's such a funny mistake because it totally makes sense. Because it's a weird way of referring to it, but I can't get over how funny it was. It's like Monday, 3 interviews. Like, okay. That was a weird thing for a professor to ask for on an assignment. I feel like you should have questioned that one. Asked a question. Anyway, so when you're preparing your interview guide or schedule, obviously you need to ask what's interesting about this issue, right? So what's interesting about your research question? What is it that you're curious about? What is it that's puzzling you? And what is it that you think, the person that you're interviewing is going to be able to tell you? Now, there's honestly a couple of different ways of thinking about this, because sometimes what you're going to have is like a general interview schedule that you're going to use on a relatively undifferentiated population that you don't know anything about, right? So you're going and you're interviewing, I don't know, let's say furries, because why not? Right, so you're interviewing furries, but you don't know anything about the furries that you're going to interview beforehand, right? So you don't know, you're going to go to the furry convention and you're going to recruit furries there, and you've got your interview guide. So you need a set of kind of general questions for those specific, for that broad group. And I would say that's kind of a general interview guide, and that's going to look a little bit different than some of the ones like what I've done in the past typically, or very specific to the person that you are interviewing. And you see and here, right, like when I was doing research on Russian TV, I was doing interviews on Skype or Google Meet. Zoom wasn't a thing yet, but those two were around, with very particular people. And there I was preparing very specific interview guides for each person, because you could do things like look up their IMDb page, look up their LinkedIn page, see what kind of experience they'd had, see who they were, what they'd worked on, and all sorts of things. So you could make the questions very tailored to the specific area that they were going to be able to tell you about. So very different approaches for both of those things. But you do have to think about those questions, what's interesting about the issue, what is puzzling you in different ways for those different things. Because when you're doing a specific interview, you're going to be like, okay, what does this person potentially know about this subject that someone else wouldn't, and how do I get access to that information? Okay. One of the things with interviewing, never get too attached to your interview guide, because people are funny and they'll tell you all sorts of weird stuff. And sometimes, oh no, sorry. We found out just a few minutes ago, we've been paying participants in our big research project through a bank account that belongs to me that I created just for this at Tangerine, and 100% this looks like money laundering because we're making like hundreds of payments a month, and we've cleared like $150,000 in less than a year in payments to people, and the bank just sent me a registered mail letter saying that they're canceling our account. So now my bosses are freaking out because now we have no way to pay people starting at the beginning or the end of November. I'm like, haha, that's funny. I 100% knew this was going to happen one day. But now I just have like 6 messages from my boss being like, what are we going to do? I'm like, I don't know. I'm teaching. What do you want from me? I just work here. Like, you figure it out. You're the project lead. You pay them from your account, and then your account can be discontinued. That'll be super fun. Okay, anyway. So, never get too attached to your interview guide, because inevitably, if someone is telling you something really interesting, or they're really invested in telling you something, and it's chewing up your time, the thing you don't want to do is force them back into your interview guide artificially, because A, that can kill conversations, and B, maybe you didn't think of the right questions. So you always have to be kind of open to doing different things. So yeah, you always have to be flexible in this kind of thing. I've definitely heard of people, especially first-time interviewers, who really got into it with people or had interviews not go very well because they kept trying to force someone to answer the questions that they had thought of when the person was telling them something really interesting. So don't get too attached to your interview guide. And a lot of interviewing is a little bit of improvisation, right? You got to be able to think on your feet. So, okay, unstructured interviews are typically a very short list of issues. You might not even prep questions, you just kind of go. But most people don't do unstructured, most people are doing semi-structured. Longer list of questions that you then kind of riff on as you go through. Okay, preparing an interview guide / schedule. Monday, you should do 4 interviews. No, I'm kidding. Okay, so pretty straightforward. You figure out your loose order of questions, right? So usually you have like an introducing question. We'll talk about different question types in a sec. You have an introducing question, and then you have some kind of order to the questions you want. Usually you start with the topics you think are the most important and kind of work your way down. You want broad questions related to relevant issues to give people enough space to give you kind of elaborate answers. If you focus the questions in too much, right, people might not have much to say. You might not give them enough space. Language, yeah, this one, again, you might have to judge this based on who the audience that you are working with is. You need language that's easily understood by your participants. Right now, if you happen to be doing like CEOs or executives at companies, or people that are fairly educated, you can probably go with fairly complex language. If you're doing you're interviewing children, that is going to be, or high schoolers, right? You're going to need a different kind of set of questions. Oh, stupid phone. I should just shut you off. Is there a way to turn the vibration function off too? I could just see Sandra pulling her hair out, probably in her car, and it's making me laugh and feel bad at the same time. I'm laughing and crying. I don't know why. Okay, no leading questions, right? You want to phrase things as neutrally as possible, right? So as not to suggest the answer to your participants, or especially, I guess with leading questions, you can create reactivity as well, right? Reactivity. In that if you're suggesting what you clearly want to be the answer to this question in the way that you're asking the question, participants may actually change their answers to give you the results that you want, right? Or maybe just to go against you because they think you're a jerk. But either way, right, if you're like, wouldn't you say that Donald Trump uses a lot of imagery that's very similar to the Nazis, right? You're sort of an American journalist. Or obviously leading the person into a set of conclusions that you clearly want them to talk about, right? Like, you would instead probably want to ask that question like, oh, when you were attending or saw that Donald Trump rally, what did you think? Like, what did you think of that? And then if they saw Nazi imagery, they can tell you that, not being like, wouldn't you say that Donald Trump is obviously the next Hitler, right? It's like, you're not giving them a lot of space and you're kind of telling them what you want them to say. And again, it can create some reactivity, and obviously the validity of your results is going to be in question if you're sort of setting it up in such a way. Yeah, prompts to ensure sufficient personal information about the individual participant is collected to contextualize the data. This, I would actually say, only applies to certain scenarios. Like if you're doing, my example of the furry convention where you're just showing up and interviewing random furries, then you definitely need to get some like demographic information. When I've done it, I always arrange interviews well in advance, and so I pre-screen. And I usually phrase it as like, oh, I just want to make sure that you are, that you fit the profile of who I want to be interviewing. So could you tell me a little bit about yourself? And this is usually done by email. And then people will be like, oh yeah, I'm a 45-year-old person working in British television. And right, if that's the kind of person you want to talk to, or I'm a 45-year-old man who my persona is a weasel named Cedric. Why is a weasel named Cedric the thing that's a... I create things. See, I was thinking Hufflepuff, but technically I guess it's a badger, and Cedric Diggory is in Hufflepuff, so that's how I put those together. I had this image of like Hufflepuff in my brain. I don't know why. So, right, you can pre-screen those things, and then you don't have to get all of that stuff in your interview. Now you're all laughing, and it hurts a little bit. Okay. Oh, only 24 minutes. How the time flies. Okay, so, yes. So before the interview, familiarize yourself with the setting and to contextualize the data. So you should know where you are. Have good equipment and know how to use it, right? So when you're recording interviews, right, and this is why recording online interviews is my favorite, because now all the tools are built into like Zoom and Google Meet, and I love it. It used to be you had to download third-party software and test it. If you have like a digital recorder, or you're using your iPhone to record audio, just make sure everything works properly. I guess the neat thing is now you can buy little microphones like this, like a 2-set, and you just plug a little dongle into your phone and clip one on each person if you're just interviewing one person, and it works great. Use a quiet and private setting for interviews. Okay. But it shouldn't be too private. So definitely, you need a setting where you can record what's being said by both people, right? So it doesn't have to be like dead quiet. I've seen people do interviews in like Starbucks, right? And as long as it's not a super loud Starbucks and your microphones can sort of pick up what both people are saying, that's perfectly fine, right? I think, but the reason I say not too private is obviously, you never know what people are going to be like, how people are going to be. So if you're meeting someone in person, you need a public-private place, if that kind of makes sense. My favorite is always like public libraries, right? Especially if they have like a room with lots of windows that you can book in advance. And so you can invite someone in, You can shut the door, but there's a big window so that people can see what's going on inside, and there's people kind of coming and going and all of that stuff. So it's quiet, it's private, but it's not too private. And again, that is both for your protection, depending on who you are interviewing, right? You might not want to be in too private a space with them, but also for their protection, so that there's people visible, like people see what's going on, and you potentially as a academic and person in power can't do anything funny, right? And you got to think about that all the time. If you're ever like interviewing vulnerable people, especially, minors, young adult or adolescents more, someone who's not yet an adult, you definitely want to make it in a private but public kind of setting. And I know that that's kind of weird. So think about where you're going to do these interviews. I'm gonna put a cardinal rule. Never at their home. Ever. Never, ever, 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 ever go to someone's house unless you potentially want to be serial killered and put in their freezer. If that's your life goal, you just never know. When someone shuts the door of their house, it's a very safe private space for them. For you, you have no idea what's going to happen in there. There's no one observing anything, or anyone who's in there is their people. So if they say you did something weird or ask them a weird question, you have no corroboration. So never go to someone's house unless, Psycho seems like a how-to guide to you, right? So yeah, never go to someone's house. We've had grad students make this mistake, and senior academics chew them out for this. It's like, are you out of your freaking mind? Never go to someone's house. Also, never invite them to your house. I think that probably goes without saying, but never invite participants to your house. No matter how friendly you find them, and no matter, maybe you've gotten to know them over years, always keep that professional barrier. But yes, never at someone's house, right? I've heard of people doing interviews just outside of someone's house, right? Like on the driveway, which is a little weird, and I wouldn't recommend it. But it's still kind of a public space. But yeah, I would say like cafe, library, somewhere else. Yeah, please.
I don't know if this is possible, but if you know the person you're interviewing, like if you're
they were your friend?
Yeah.
Are you reasonably certain they're not going to murder you?
Yeah.
Okay. If you actually like know the person, like they're a friend of yours or an acquaintance, that you could probably make an exception in that rule. So I will say almost never go to their house. Now, you interviewing your friends for an academic project does raise a number of concerns as well, especially like how valid are your results going to be, because they're your friends and they would, what results do you want to find? I mean, I will say that I was abused by my mother just because we're friends, right? And your project is on abuse, right? But they might try to help you in some way. So you probably shouldn't. I'm just spitballing this as I think about it. You probably shouldn't be interviewing your friends, generally speaking. But yeah, I mean, if you know them well enough that you would go over to their house on a normal day, that's probably okay. But certainly if you're recruiting from the general public, do not go to their house. There might be 45 cats, or something worse, right? They might be like, oh, I'm sorry, what happened to that grad student? They said they were going off for an interview and they haven't been heard from 40 years. And then there's like a memorial shrine for you in the humanities building or something, the grad student who vanished and never returned, right? Yeah, that would be more my concern. It's more like your safety. And people are weird, right? Like if it's someone you don't know, they might just make up something about you. Like this person came and they threatened me. And it's like, you're like, I don't know, but it could get you in a lot of trouble because you have no witnesses, right? So, but yeah, I don't know if that answers your question. But in the very odd scenario that you're interviewing your friends, I suppose that's okay, as long as your friends are okay, right? Which hopefully they are. I mean, hopefully you're not friends with any serial killers, but we never know. Okay, I think I've joked this to death now. I'm not checking the time. I'm not worried about things at all. This is Zen, the board game. And I don't know why this amuses me so much, but you move by not moving. So these are the rules of Zen, the board game. I don't know why I find this cartoon as amusing as I do, but I do. Okay, Zen. Okay, if you're wondering what the dragon and the fox staring at a piece with one square. Okay, good interviewing technique. Oh, before the interviewing, make sure you have good interviewing technique. Active listening. Okay, so be knowledgeable about the topic of study. Clear in asking simple and understandable questions. I mean, you do want to, I know you're trying to learn something, and I know this could maybe be a little bit counterintuitive, especially if you're talking to, sorry, it got quiet all of a sudden, and then that was very loud. If you're talking to, say, specialists especially, if you come in and it seems like you know nothing, they are going to dismiss you very quickly, and the interview can end very badly for you, right? So if you were talking to an engineer or to someone in the entertainment industry, one of the things, if you seem like you do not know anything, they will not respect you, and they probably will not talk to you. Conversely, if you can bestow upon them, and this sometimes happens in like the pre-interview chatter, that you know a lot about the topic, they're going to be much more open to you. And when I was doing one of my interviews, I was talking to, I can't tell you who because they asked for anonymity, but they were a vice president of one of the big Hollywood companies that was doing work in Russia. And, in kind of through the interview, we were talking. I was talking about stuff that I'd seen on Russian TV and asking her about it. And she was like, wow, she actually said this to me. I have it in the transcripts. I can prove it. She's like, I actually thought this was going to be a complete waste of time because I figured you wouldn't know anything about this topic and I'd have to like educate you like you were a baby. And she's like, but actually, I'm really impressed. You actually know a lot about this. And I'm like, I think I was like, well, I mean, I spend like hours a day working on this project. I'd better know something about it. But she was like, but you'd be surprised how many times people want to talk to you about this particular subject and they don't know anything about it. And you have to like explain everything to them, right? And I think I had booked an hour with her and we ended up talking for almost 3, right? And this is like an high up, like vice president at a big Hollywood studio. And it was a great interview and I got so much out of it. But part of that was she was having fun because we both were talking about the same shows that we've both been watching, that were all in Russian. But we had a lot to talk about. So being knowledgeable about a topic is really important because, nobody wants to have to educate you on the basics, right? Clear. And you want to ask simple, understandable questions. You don't want to confuse people. Be gentle, sensitive, and open. I guess. You basically don't interrupt people, right? You want to ask your questions without jumping in all the time, right? Or kind of seeming like you're obnoxious. You want to let people talk. If they're rambling, you can redirect, right? Or if they've gotten off topic, you can redirect. But the worst thing you can do is jump in all the time, leading questions. You want to do how to, in interviewing, there's a lot of, okay, yeah, interesting, okay. You're just kind of like letting the person talk and giving them feedback. Don't sit like this the whole time because they want to read something off of you that you're enjoying the conversation. But you don't want to interrupt them all the time, right? Being like, wait, stop. Tell me more about that, right? If you feel like they're done and you can follow up, but don't feel like you're interrupting or cutting them off or not valuing their opinion. Be flexible and steering. Be strong and yet weak. Powerful and yet gentle. No, sorry, oxymorons being out there. I mean, you have to be kind of flexible, let people talk, but also make sure that you get what you want. So you have to steer the conversation. Like I said, if people are kind of rambling, and inevitably some interviews that you do, people are going to like, and that reminds me of the time my cat Mittens ate an onion. And they're like, okay, wait, this is not about your cat Mittens, but that thing you said about, XYZ is definitely, sorry. I just had a thought, because a lot of our interviews are with, in the prison project, a lot of people have taken drugs, and the steering part becomes really difficult when someone's high. And for some reason that jumped into my head. And so our interviewers have gotten really good at being like, okay. And sometimes it's like, maybe we should try the rest of this interview another day, because sometimes people are too high to actually go. But yeah, steering, just you got to gently redirect the conversation to make sure you get what you need while not cutting people off. So you must be strong and yet gentle, powerful and yet kind. I don't know. Oxymorons of all sorts. Okay, kinds of questions. This is, introducing questions. Would be something like this. Please tell me about when your interest in X began, right? And not the social media platform, whatever your topic is the X. Please tell me about when your interest in being a furry first began, right? I do find the way this is phrased a little bit clinical, but I think you get the idea. I would always want to put a little bit more color into it. Oh wow, your persona is a weasel named Cedric? That's so cool. Could you tell me about that? Like, why did you adopt that persona? What made you interested in becoming Cedric in the first place? Oh, so many jokes. I'm sorry. I'm a bad person. One day someone in my class is actually going to be a furry, and I'm going to get a very long and angry note about how I have anti-furryism or something. And it's not. I think it's a funny example. I'm sorry if you're a furry and I've been mocking you this entire time. I'm so sorry. I'm trying to make intro to methods more interesting with something that makes people laugh. Okay, so very simply, introducing questions, get them into the topic, right? Like, okay, how did you, a kid from from Manchester working for BBC4 end up going to Russia to work for, TNT or Channel 1, right? And then they're going to be like, oh man, what a wild story. Let me tell you, right? Introducing question, you want to get them into the topic as fast as possible and with something that's going to give you something to latch onto. Follow-up questions are pretty easy. You want to rephrase the interviewer or the interviewee's answer and ask them to elaborate. So it's like, so when you say, oh my God, I'm just trying to think of a furry thing on the fly here. So when you said that, you just found weasels to be the greatest animal in the world, what did you mean by that, right? Or why weasels in particular? Whatever, since you're motivated, what did you mean by that, right? Oh, you said it was really because of your mom. What do you mean by that? Oh, I'm going Freudian here for some reason, right? Okay. Probing questions. Short, general questions inviting the respondent to reflect more deeply on what they already said without particular reference to the details, right? So, this is the kind of question where, as opposed to a follow-up question where you're restating, you are just kind of giving a quick probe, right? A little bit of an interruption, but it's like, oh, what do you mean by that? Like, oh, so, you said I don't know, you were having problems at home. What do you mean by that, right? You said that you were, you needed to get out of England. What do you mean by that? Or why? You said that this is the kind of TV show you had to make. Can you give me an example of like, a specific, how so, right? It's obviously, and I'm trying to create a whole dialogue in my head in real time. But, anything where you could be like, just trying to get a little bit more detail out of something. Like, what do you mean by that? Oh, can you define that for me? Can you tell me a little bit more about that, right? Those are all probing questions. Basically, you're not restating things, you're just trying to get a little bit more information. Okay, specifying questions, right? Okay, this happened, what happened next? Or what did you do next? How did you solve that problem, right? Anything like that. Just really, really basic, kind of filling in kind of detailed questions. Okay, all makes sense so far? All right. So these are the fun ones, because these are the ones that people will get mixed up, especially if I ask an exam question about this. So direct questions are the easiest, because you're basically just asking like straight up direct questions about something that interests you, right? So do you find it easy to keep smiling when serving customers, right? So directly just ask straight up what you want. Do you enjoy the event or the atmosphere at FurryCon, right? Just straight up, no glossing it over, just something you want to know. Does it get hot in that furry suit, right? Really, really easy. The textbook says, and a lot of guides will say, that you should leave direct questions like this towards the end, so that you don't influence the direction of the interview too much by imposing something you're clearly interested in a specific way. I don't think I've ever actually taken that to heart, but that's okay. That's best practices are sometimes different than what I do. All right, indirect questions. So these are one of the hard ones, but they can be really useful. And again, kind of like with survey questions, right? There's a whole category of survey questions where you're asking what the respondent thinks other people are thinking, or how other people are going to act, based on their perception. Indirect questions sometimes are kind of like this, right? So instead of asking so typically you would think of, an indirect question as asking that person's perception of what other people think, right? This one's not as good an example. This one's a better example, right? What do most people around here think of the way that management treats its staff? So you see, it's like, so if you're talking to, one employee, what did I do there? Now they have 3 legs. Okay. You're asking them about, kind of the collective, which will include them, but it also gives them a freer hand, right? To say something like what they actually think about the management, but they can kind of externalize it to what everybody else here thinks about the management, right? So how do you feel about work, or what do most people think about working at Enterprise Rent-A-Car? And then they can tell you, very famously, if you've ever taken my sociology of youth class, I worked at Enterprise Rent-A-Car, and it's an enduring and lasting trauma. And if I ever drive by one, I cry for like half an hour. That part's not true, but it is an enduring trauma. But you're giving them a chance to kind of externalize it and hopefully give their real opinion. But in an indirect way, so that they don't feel like it might come with a judgment, right? So, you could ask, say, your friend who is a furry, what do you think most people around you think about furries, right? And so you're asking them about how they think other people think about them, right? So you get a sense of their internal dialogue or monologue about other people in kind of around them. Again, this is mostly just useful in the sense that it gives you a sense of their perception of other people, or sometimes a chance to speak more freely, because instead of it being my voice, like in the example of this question, you're giving their thoughts the collective voice, so they can be like, oh yeah, we all hate management. Who doesn't, right? Everyone hates management. unless you're a manager, and I'm sorry. I know people hate you, but it's not your fault. It's the system. But yeah, like you're giving them a kind of voice that externalizes their things. They can put it on a group rather than on just themselves, or you get their sense of what other people think of them. Now, the reason I say, how do you feel about is not a great indirect question. You can sometimes have it like, yeah, see, I feel like that's more of a direct question. There are ways of asking, about someone's feelings using an indirect question. But I think it's easier to think of it as in this externalized lens. So stay with that. Okay, does that make sense? Okay. My God, they're going. Oops, I have these twice, but this time with better graphics. Great, amazing. Okay. I don't know why those are there twice. Clearly, at one point, I made the slides nicer and then forgot to take out the old terrible slides. Oh, all right. Structuring questions. How am I doing for time? Oh, I'm out of time. That clock says 42, and so I thought I had more time. Let's stop here. I need time. I need 2 days to think of more furry-based humor. So.